Part One, Chapter 2, Section 3 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatria in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 2, Section 3. At last the interview with the governor took place too. Our dear, mild Ivan Ossipovitch had only just returned, and only just had time to hear the angry complaint from the club. There was no doubt that something must be done, but he was troubled. The hospitable old man seemed also rather afraid of his young kinsman. He made up his mind, however, to induce him to apologize to the club and to his victim in satisfactory form, and if required by letter, and then to persuade him to leave us for a time, travelling, for instance, to improve his mind, in Italy, or in fact anywhere abroad. In the waiting room in which on this occasion he received Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch, who had been at other times privileged as a relation to wander all over the house unchecked, Alyosha Telyatnikov, a clerk of refined manners, who was also a member of the governor's household, was sitting in a corner opening envelopes at a table; and in the next room, at the window nearest to the door, a stout and sturdy colonel, a former friend and colleague of the governor, was sitting alone reading the Golos, paying no attention, of course, to what was taking place in the waiting room. In fact, he had his back turned. Ivan Ossipovitch approached the subject in a roundabout way, almost in a whisper, but kept getting a little muddled. Nikolay looked anything but cordial, not at all as a relation should. He was pale, and sat looking down, and continually moving his eyebrows as though trying to control acute pain. "You have a kind heart and a generous one, Nicolas," the old man put in among other things. "You're a man of great culture, you've grown up in the highest circles, and here, too, your behaviour has hitherto been a model, which has been a great consolation to your mother, who is so precious to all of us. And now again everything has appeared in such an unaccountable light, so detrimental to all. I speak as a friend of your family, as an old man who loves you sincerely, and a relation, at whose words you cannot take offence. Tell me, what drives you to such reckless proceedings so contrary to all accepted rules and habits? What can be the meaning of such acts, which seem almost like outbreaks of delirium?" Nikolay listened with vexation and impatience. All at once there was a gleam of something sly and mocking in his eyes. "I'll tell you what drives me to it," he said sullenly, and looking round him he bent down to Ivan Ossipovitch's ear. The refined Alyosha Telyatnikov moved 3 steps farther away towards the window, and the colonel coughed over the Golos. Poor Ivan Ossipovitch hurriedly and trustfully inclined his ear. He was exceedingly curious. And then something utterly incredible, though on the other side only too unmistakable, took place. The old man suddenly felt that, instead of telling him some interesting secret, Nikolay had seized the upper part of his ear between his teeth and was nipping it rather hard. He shuddered and breath failed him. "Nicolas, this is beyond a joke," he moaned mechanically in a voice not his own. Alyosha and the colonel had not yet grasped the situation; besides they couldn't see, and fancied up to the end that the two were whispering together. And yet the old man's desperate face alarmed them. They looked at one another with wide open eyes, not knowing whether to rush to his assistance as agreed, or to wait. Nikolay noticed this perhaps, and bit the harder. "Nicolas, Nicolas," his victim moaned again. "Come, you've had your joke, that's enough." In another moment the poor governor would certainly have died of terror, but the monster had mercy on him and let go his ear. The old man's deadly terror lasted for a full minute, and it was followed by a sort of fit. Within half an hour Nikolay was arrested and removed for the time to the guard room, where he was confined in a special cell with a special sentinel at the door. This decision was a harsh one, but our mild governor was so angry that he was prepared to take the responsibility even if he had to face Varvara Petrovna. To the general amazement, when this lady arrived at the governor's in haste and in nervous irritation to discuss the matter with him at once, she was refused admittance, whereupon, without getting out of the carriage, she returned home, unable to believe her senses. And at last everything was explained. At 2 o'clock in the morning the prisoner, who had till then been calm and had even slept, suddenly became noisy, began furiously beating on the door with his fists, with unnatural strength wrenched the iron grating off the door, broke the window, and cut his hands all over. When the officer on duty ran with a detachment of men and the keys, and ordered the cell to be opened that they might rush in and bind the maniac, it appeared that he was suffering from acute brain fever. He was taken home to his mother. Everything was explained at once. All our three doctors gave it as their opinion that the patient might well have been in a delirious state for 3 days before, and that though he might have apparently been in possession of full consciousness and cunning, yet he might have been deprived of common sense and will, which was indeed borne out by the facts. So it turned out that Liputin had guessed the truth sooner than any one. Ivan Ossipovitch, who was a man of delicacy and feeling, was completely abashed. But what was striking was that he, too, had considered Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch capable of any mad action, even when in the full possession of his faculties. At the club, too, people were ashamed, and wondered how it was they had failed to see the elephant, and had missed the only explanation of all these marvels. There were, of course, sceptics among them, but they could not long maintain their position. Nikolay was in bed for more than 2 months. A famous doctor was summoned from Moscow for a consultation. The whole town called on Varvara Petrovna. She forgave them. When in the spring Nikolay had completely recovered and assented without discussion to his mother's proposal that he should go for a tour to Italy, she begged him further to pay visits of farewell to all the neighbours, and so far as possible to apologize where necessary. Nikolay agreed with great alacrity. It became known at the club that he had had a most delicate explanation with Pyotr Pavlovitch Gaganov, at the house of the latter, who had been completely satisfied with his apology. As he went round to pay these calls Nikolay was very grave and even gloomy. Every one appeared to receive him sympathetically, but everybody seemed embarrassed and glad that he was going to Italy. Ivan Ossipovitch was positively tearful, but was, for some reason, unable to bring himself to embrace him even at the final leave taking. It is true that some of us retained the conviction that the scamp had simply been making fun of us, and that the illness was neither here nor there. He went to see Liputin too. "Tell me," he said, "how could you guess beforehand what I should say about your sense, and prime Agafya with an answer to it?" "Why," laughed Liputin, "it was because I recognised that you were a clever man, and so I foresaw what your answer would be. Anyway, it was a remarkable coincidence. But excuse me, did you consider me a sensible man and not insane when you sent Agafya?" "For the cleverest and most rational, and I only pretended to believe that you were insane. And you guessed at once what was in my mind, and sent a testimonial to my wit through Agafya." "Well, there you're a little mistaken. I really was unwell," muttered Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch, frowning. "Bah!" he cried. "Do you suppose I'm capable of attacking people when I'm in my senses? What object would there be in it?" Liputin shrank together and didn't know what to answer. Nikolay turned pale, or at least so it seemed to Liputin. "You have a very peculiar way of looking at things, anyhow," Nikolay went on. "But as for Agafya, I understand, of course, that you simply sent her to be rude to me." "I couldn't challenge you to a duel, could I?" "Oh, no, of course. I seem to have heard that you're not fond of duels." "Why borrow from the French?" said Liputin, doubling up again. "You're for nationalism, then?" Liputin shrank into himself more than ever. "Bah, bah! What do I see?" cried Nicolas, noticing a volume of Considérant in the most conspicuous place on the table. "You don't mean to say you're a Fourierist? I'm afraid you must be. And isn't this, too, borrowing from the French?" He laughed, tapping the book with his finger. "No, that's not taken from the French," Liputin cried with positive fury, jumping up from his chair. "That is taken from the universal language of humanity, not simply from the French. From the language of the universal social republic and harmony of mankind, let me tell you. Not simply from the French." "Foo! Hang it all! There's no such language," laughed Nikolay. Sometimes a trifle will catch the attention and exclusively absorb it for a time. Most of what I have to tell of young Stavrogin will come later. But I will note now as a curious fact that of all the impressions made on him by his stay in our town, the one most sharply imprinted on his memory was the unsightly and almost abject figure of the little provincial official, the coarse and jealous family despot, the miserly money lender who picked up the candle ends and scraps left from dinner, and was at the same time a passionate believer in some visionary future social harmony, who at night gloated in ecstasies over fantastic pictures of a future phalanstery, in the approaching realization of which in Russia and in our province he believed as firmly as in his own existence. And in the very place where he had saved up to buy himself a little home, where he had married for the second time, getting a dowry with his bride, where perhaps for 100 miles round there was not one man, himself included, who was the very least like a future member of the universal human republic in social harmony. God knows how these people come to exist, Nikolay wondered, recalling sometimes the unlooked for Fourierist. End of Chapter 2, Section 3, recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 1, Chapter 2, Section 4 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 2, Section 4. Our prince travelled for over 3 years, so that he was almost forgotten in the town. We learned from Stepan Trofimovitch that he had travelled all over Europe, that he had even been in Egypt and had visited Jerusalem, and then had joined some scientific expedition to Iceland, and he actually did go to Iceland. It was reported, too, that he had spent one winter attending lectures in a German university. He did not write often to his mother, twice a year or even less. But Varvara Petrovna was not angry or offended at this. She accepted submissively and without repining the relations that had been established once for all between her son and herself. She fretted for her Nicolas, and dreamed of him continually. She kept her dreams and lamentations to herself. She seemed to have become less intimate even with Stepan Trofimovitch. She was forming secret projects, and seemed to have become more careful about money than ever. She was more than ever given to saving money and being angry at Stepan Trofimovitch's losses at cards. At last, in the April of this year, she received a letter from Paris from Praskovya Ivanovna Drozdov, the widow of the general and the friend of Varvara Petrovna's childhood. Praskovya Ivanovna, whom Varvara Petrovna had not seen or corresponded with for 8 years, wrote, informing her that Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch had become very intimate with them and a great friend of her only daughter Liza, and that he was intending to accompany them to Switzerland, to Verney Montreux, though in the household of Count K., a very influential personage in Petersburg, who was now staying in Paris. He was received like a son of the family, so that he almost lived at the Count's. The letter was brief, and the object of it was perfectly clear, though it contained only a plain statement of the above mentioned facts without drawing any inference from them. Varvara Petrovna did not pause long to consider. She made up her mind instantly, made her preparations, and taking with her her protégée Dasha, Shatov's sister, she set off in the middle of April for Paris, and from there went on to Switzerland. She returned in July alone, leaving Dasha with the Drozdovs. She brought us the news that the Drozdovs themselves had promised to arrive among us by the end of August. The Drozdovs, too, were landowners of our province, but the official duties of General Ivan Ivanovitch Drozdov, who had been a friend of Varvara Petrovna's and a colleague of her husband's, had always prevented them from visiting their magnificent estate. On the death of the general, which had taken place the year before, the inconsolable widow had gone abroad with her daughter, partly in order to try the grape cure which she proposed to carry out at Verney Montreux during the latter half of the summer. On their return to Russia they intended to settle in our province for good. She had a large house in the town which had stood empty for many years with the windows nailed up. They were wealthy people. Praskovya Ivanovna had been, in her first marriage, a Madame Tushin, and, like her school friend Varvara Petrovna, was the daughter of a government contractor of the old school, and she, too, had been an heiress at her marriage. Tushin, a retired cavalry captain, was also a man of means and of some ability. At his death he left a snug fortune to his only daughter Liza, a child of 7. Now that Lizaveta Nikolaevna was 22, her private fortune might confidently be reckoned at 200,000 roubles, to say nothing of the property which was bound to come to her at the death of her mother, who had no children by her second marriage. Varvara Petrovna seemed to be very well satisfied with her expedition. In her own opinion she had succeeded in coming to a satisfactory understanding with Praskovya Ivanovna, and immediately on her arrival she confided everything to Stepan Trofimovitch. She was positively effusive with him as she had not been for a very long time. "Hurrah!" cried Stepan Trofimovitch and snapped his fingers. He was in a perfect rapture, especially as he had spent the whole time of his friend's absence in extreme dejection. On setting off she had not even taken leave of him properly, and had said nothing of her plan to "that old woman," dreading, perhaps, that he might chatter about it. She was cross with him at the time on account of a considerable gambling debt which she had suddenly discovered. But before she left Switzerland she had felt that on her return she must make up for it to her forsaken friend, especially as she had treated him very curtly for a long time past. Her abrupt and mysterious departure had made a profound and poignant impression on the timid heart of Stepan Trofimovitch, and to make matters worse he was beset with other difficulties at the same time. He was worried by a very considerable money obligation which had weighed upon him for a long time, and which he could never hope to meet without Varvara Petrovna's assistance. Moreover, in the May of this year, the term of office of our mild and gentle Ivan Ossipovitch came to an end. He was superseded under rather unpleasant circumstances. Then, while Varvara Petrovna was still away, there followed the arrival of our new governor, Andrey Antonovitch von Lembke, and with that a change began at once to be perceptible in the attitude of almost the whole of our provincial society towards Varvara Petrovna, and consequently towards Stepan Trofimovitch. He had already had time anyway to make some disagreeable though valuable observations, and seemed very apprehensive alone without Varvara Petrovna. He had an agitating suspicion that he had already been mentioned to the governor as a dangerous man. He knew for a fact that some of our ladies meant to give up calling on Varvara Petrovna. Of our governor's wife, who was only expected to arrive in the autumn, it was reported that though she was, so it was heard, proud, she was a real aristocrat, and not like that poor Varvara Petrovna. Everybody seemed to know for a fact, and in the greatest detail, that our governor's wife and Varvara Petrovna had met already in society and had parted enemies, so that the mere mention of Madame von Lembke's name would, it was said, make a painful impression on Varvara Petrovna. The confident and triumphant air of Varvara Petrovna, the contemptuous indifference with which she heard of the opinions of our provincial ladies and the agitation in local society, revived the flagging spirits of Stepan Trofimovitch and cheered him up at once. With peculiar, gleefully obsequious humour he was beginning to describe the new governor's arrival. "You are no doubt aware, excellent ami," he said, jauntily and coquettishly drawling his words, "what is meant by a Russian administrator, speaking generally, and what is meant by a new Russian administrator, that is the newly baked, newly established ces interminables mots russes. But I don't think you can know in practice what is meant by administrative ardour and what sort of thing that is." "Administrative ardour? I don't know what that is." "Well, vous savez chez nous, en un mot, set the most insignificant nonentity to sell miserable tickets at a railway station, and the nonentity will at once feel privileged to look down on you like a Jupiter, pour montrer son pouvoir, when you go to take a ticket. 'Now then,' he says, 'I shall show you my power.' And in them it comes to a genuine administrative ardour. En un mot, I've read that some verger in one of our Russian churches abroad, mais c'est très curieux, literally drove a distinguished English family, les dames charmantes, out of the church before the beginning of the Lenten service, vous savez ces chants et le livre de Job, on the simple pretext that foreigners are not allowed to loaf about a Russian church, and that they must come at the time fixed, and he sent them into fainting fits. That verger was suffering from an attack of administrative ardour et il a montré son pouvoir. Cut it short if you can, Stepan Trofimovitch. Mr. von Lembke is making a tour of the province now. En un mot, this Andrey Antonovitch, though he is a Russified German and of the Orthodox persuasion, and even, I will say that for him, a remarkably handsome man of about 40. What makes you think he's a handsome man? He has eyes like a sheep's. Precisely so. But in this I yield, of course, to the opinion of our ladies. Let's get on, Stepan Trofimovitch, I beg you. By the way, you're wearing a red necktie. Is it long since you've taken to it? I've I've only put it on to day. And do you take your constitutional? Do you go for a 4-mile walk every day as the doctor told you to? Not always. I knew you didn't. I felt sure of that when I was in Switzerland," she cried irritably. "Now you must go not 4 but 6 miles a day. You've grown terribly slack, terribly, terribly. You're not simply getting old, you're getting decrepit. You shocked me when I first saw you just now, in spite of your red tie. Quelle idée rouge! Go on about Von Lembke if you've really something to tell me, and do finish some time, I entreat you. I'm tired." En un mot, I only wanted to say that he is one of those administrators who begin to have power at 40, who till they're 40 have been stagnating in insignificance, and then suddenly come to the front through suddenly acquiring a wife or some other equally desperate means. That is, he has gone away now; that is, I mean to say, it was at once whispered in both his ears that I am a corrupter of youth and a hotbed of provincial atheism. He began making inquiries at once. "Is that true?" "I took steps about it, in fact. When he was informed that you ruled the province, vous savez, he allowed himself to use the expression that there shall be nothing of that sort in the future." "Did he say that?" "That there shall be nothing of the sort in the future, and avec cette mort his wife, Yulia Mihailovna, we shall behold at the end of August. She's coming straight from Petersburg." "From abroad. We met there." "Vraiment?" "In Paris and in Switzerland. She's related to the Drozdovs." "Related? What an extraordinary coincidence! They say she is ambitious and... supposed to have great connections." "Nonsense! Connections indeed! She was an old maid without a farthing till she was 45, but now she's hooked her Von Lembke, and of course her whole object is to push him forward. They're both intriguers." "And they say she's 2 years older than he is?" "5. Her mother used to wear out her skirts on my doorsteps in Moscow. She used to beg for an invitation to our balls as a favour when my husband was living. And this creature used to sit all night alone in a corner without dancing, with her turquoise fly on her forehead, so that simply from pity I used to have to send her her first partner at 2 o'clock in the morning. She was 25 then, and they used to rig her out in short skirts like a little girl. It was improper to have them about at last." "I seem to see that fly. I tell you, as soon as I arrived I was in the thick of an intrigue. You read Madame Drozdov's letter, of course. What could be clearer? What did I find? That fool, Praskovya herself she always was a fool looked at me as much as to ask why I'd come. You can fancy how surprised I was. I looked round and there was that Lembke woman at her tricks, and that cousin of hers, old Drozdov's nephew. It was all clear. You may be sure I changed all that in a twinkling, and Praskovya is on my side again, but what an intrigue!" "In which you came off victor, however. Oh, you're a Bismarck!" "Without being a Bismarck, I'm equal to seeing through falseness and stupidity wherever I meet it. The Lembkes' falseness and Praskovya's folly. I don't know when I've met such a flabby woman, and what's more her legs are swollen, and she's a good natured simpleton too. What can be more foolish than a good natured simpleton?" "A spiteful fool, ma bonne amie, a spiteful fool is still more foolish," Stepan Trofimovitch protested magnanimously. "You're right, perhaps. Do you remember Liza? Charmante enfant! But she's not an enfant now, but a woman, and a woman of character. She's a generous, passionate creature, and what I like about her, she stands up to that confiding fool, her mother. There was almost a row over that cousin." "Bah! And of course he's no relation of Lizaveta Nikolaevna at all. Has he designs on her?" "You see, he's a young officer, not by any means talkative, modest in fact. I always want to be just. I fancy he is opposed to the intrigue himself, and isn't aiming at anything, and it was only the Von Lembke's tricks. He had a great respect for Nicolas. You understand, it all depends on Liza. But I left her on the best of terms with Nicolas, and he promised he would come to us in November. So it's only the Von Lembke who is intriguing, and Praskovya is a blind woman. She suddenly tells me that all my suspicions are fancy. I told her to her face she was a fool. I am ready to repeat it at the day of judgment. And if it hadn't been for Nicolas begging me to leave it for a time, I wouldn't have come away without unmasking that false woman. She's been trying to ingratiate herself with Count K. through Nicolas. She wants to come between mother and son, but Liza's on our side, and I came to an understanding with Praskovya. Do you know that Karmazinov is a relation of hers?" "What? A relation of Madame von Lembke?" "Yes, of hers, distant." "Karmazinov the novelist?" "Yes, the writer. Why does it surprise you? Of course he considers himself a great man. Stuck up creature. She's coming here with him. Now she's making a fuss of him out there. She's got a notion of setting up a sort of literary society here. He's coming for a month, he wants to sell his last piece of property here. I very nearly met him in Switzerland and was very anxious not to. Though I hope he will deign to recognise me. He wrote letters to me in the old days. He has been in my house. I should like you to dress better, Stepan Trofimovitch. You're growing more slovenly every day. Oh, how you torment me! What are you reading now?" I "I understand. The same as ever. Friends and drinking, the club and cards, and the reputation of an atheist. I don't like that reputation, Stepan Trofimovitch. I don't care for you to be called an atheist, particularly now. I didn't care for it in the old days, for it's all nothing but empty chatter. It must be said at last." "Mais, mon cher..." "Listen, Stepan Trofimovitch. Of course I'm ignorant compared with you on all learned subjects, but as I was travelling here I thought a great deal about you. I've come to one conclusion." "What conclusion?" "That you and I are not the wisest people in the world, but that there are people wiser than we are." "Witty and apt. If there are people wiser than we are, then there are people more right than we are, and we may be mistaken, you mean. Mais, ma bonne amie, granted that I may make a mistake, yet have I not the common, human, eternal, supreme right of freedom of conscience? I have the right not to be bigoted or superstitious if I don't want to, and for that I shall naturally be hated by certain persons to the end of time. Et puis, comme on trouve toujours plus de moi que de raison, and as I thoroughly agree with that..." "What? What did you say?" "I said, on trouve toujours plus de moi que de raison, and as I thoroughly..." "I'm sure that's not your saying. You must have taken it from somewhere." "It was Pascal said that." "Just as I thought. It's not your own. Why don't you ever say anything like that yourself, so shortly and to the point, instead of dragging things out to such a length? That's much better than what you said just now about administrative ardour." "Ma foi, cher, why?" "In the first place probably because I'm not a Pascal after all, et puis... Secondly, we Russians never can say anything in our own language, we never have said anything hitherto, at any rate." "H'm. That's not true, perhaps. Anyway, you'd better make a note of such phrases, and remember them, you know, in case you have to talk. Ah, Stepan Trofimovitch, I have come to talk to you seriously, quite seriously." Cher ami, now that all these Von Lembkes and Karmazinovs... Oh, my goodness, how you have deteriorated! Oh, my goodness, how you do torment me! I should have liked these people to feel a respect for you, for they're not worth your little finger, but the way you behave... What will they see? What shall I have to show them? Instead of nobly standing as an example, keeping up the tradition of the past, you surround yourself with a wretched rabble. You have picked up impossible habits, you've grown feeble, you can't do without wine and cards, you read nothing but Paul de Kock and write nothing, while all of them write. All your time's wasted in gossip. How can you bring yourself to be friends with a wretched creature like your inseparable Liputin?" "Why is he mine and inseparable?" Stepan Trofimovitch protested timidly. "Where is he now?" Varvara Petrovna went on sharply and sternly. "He... He has an infinite respect for you, and he's gone to S to receive an inheritance left him by his mother." "He seems to do nothing but get money. And how's Shatov? Is he just the same?" "Irascible, mais bon. I can't endure your Shatov. He's spiteful, and he thinks too much of himself." "How is Darya Pavlovna?" "You mean Dasha? What made you think of her?" Varvara Petrovna looked at him inquisitively. "She's quite well. I left her with the Drozdovs. I heard something about your son in Switzerland. Nothing good." "Oh, this is a very stupid story. I was waiting for you, my dear, to tell you." "Enough, Stepan Trofimovitch, leave me in peace. I'm worn out. We shall have time to talk to our heart's content, especially of what's unpleasant. You've begun to splutter when you laugh; it's a sign of senility. And what a strange way of laughing you've taken to! Good heavens, what a lot of bad habits you've fallen into! Karmazinov won't come and see you. And people are only too glad to make the most of anything as it is. You've betrayed yourself completely now. Well, come, that's enough, I'm tired. You really might have mercy upon one." Stepan Trofimovitch had mercy, but he withdrew in great perturbation. End of Chapter 2, Section 4. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 1, Chapter 2, Sections 5 and 6 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 2, Section 5. Our friend certainly had fallen into not a few bad habits, especially of late. He had obviously and rapidly deteriorated, and it was true that he had become slovenly. He drank more, and had become more tearful and nervous, and had grown too impressionable on the artistic side. His face had acquired a strange facility for changing with extraordinary quickness, from the most solemn expression, for instance, to the most absurd and even foolish. He could not endure solitude, and was always craving for amusement. One had always to repeat to him some gossip, some local anecdote, and every day a new one. If no one came to see him for a long time, he wandered disconsolately about the rooms, walked to the window, puckering up his lips, heaved deep sighs, and almost fell to whimpering at last. He was always full of forebodings, was afraid of something unexpected and inevitable. He had become timorous; he began to pay great attention to his dreams. He spent all that day and evening in great depression. He sent for me, was very much agitated, talked a long while, gave me a long account of things, but all rather disconnected. Varvara Petrovna had known for a long time that he concealed nothing from me. It seemed to me at last that he was worried about something particular, and was perhaps unable to form a definite idea of it himself. As a rule when we met tête à tête, and he began making long complaints to me, a bottle was almost always brought in after a little time, and things became much more comfortable. This time there was no wine, and he was evidently struggling all the while against the desire to send for it. "And why is she always so cross?" he complained every minute, like a child. "Tous les hommes de génie et de progrès en Russie étaient, sont et seront toujours des gamblers et des drunkards qui boivent in outbreaks. And I'm not such a gambler after all. And I'm not such a drunkard. She reproaches me for not writing anything. Strange idea. She asks why I lie down. She says I ought to stand, an example and reproach. Mais entre nous soit dit, what is a man to do who is destined to stand as a reproach if not to lie down? Does she understand that?" And at last it became clear to me what was the chief particular trouble which was worrying him so persistently at this time. Many times that evening he went to the looking glass and stood a long while before it. At last he turned from the looking glass to me, and with a sort of strange despair said, "Mon cher, je suis un broken down man." Yes, certainly up to that time, up to that very day, there was one thing only of which he had always felt confident in spite of the new views, and of the change in Varvara Petrovna's ideas. That was the conviction that still he had a fascination for her feminine heart, not simply as an exile or a celebrated man of learning, but as a handsome man. For 20 years this soothing and flattering opinion had been rooted in his mind, and perhaps of all his convictions this was the hardest to part with. Had he any presentiment that evening of the colossal ordeal which was preparing for him in the immediate future? Section 6. I will now enter upon the description of that almost forgotten incident with which my story, properly speaking, begins. At last, at the very end of August, the Drozdovs returned. Their arrival made a considerable sensation in local society, and took place shortly before their relation, our new governor's wife, made her long expected appearance. But of all these interesting events I will speak later. For the present I will confine myself to saying that Praskovya Ivanovna brought Varvara Petrovna, who was expecting her so impatiently, a most perplexing problem. Nikolay had parted from them in July, and meeting Count K. on the Rhine, had set off with him and his family for Petersburg. Note: the Count's 3 daughters were all of marriageable age. "Lizaveta is so proud and obstinate that I could get nothing out of her," Praskovya Ivanovna said in conclusion. "But I saw for myself that something had happened between her and Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch. I don't know the reasons, but I fancy, my dear Varvara Petrovna, that you will have to ask your Darya Pavlovna for them. To my thinking Liza was offended. I'm glad. I can tell you that I brought you back your favourite at last, and handed her over to you. It's a weight off my mind." These venomous words were uttered with remarkable irritability. It was evident that the flabby woman had prepared them and gloated beforehand over the effect they would produce. But Varvara Petrovna was not the woman to be disconcerted by sentimental effects and enigmas. She sternly demanded the most precise and satisfactory explanations. Praskovya Ivanovna immediately lowered her tone, and even ended by dissolving into tears and expressions of the warmest friendship. This irritable but sentimental lady, like Stepan Trofimovitch, was for ever yearning for true friendship, and her chief complaint against her daughter Lizaveta Nikolaevna was just that her daughter was not a friend to her. But from all her explanations and outpourings nothing certain could be gathered but that there actually had been some sort of quarrel between Liza and Nikolay, but of the nature of the quarrel Praskovya Ivanovna was obviously unable to form a definite idea. As for her imputations against Darya Pavlovna, she not only withdrew them completely in the end, but even particularly begged Varvara Petrovna to pay no attention to her words, because they had been said in irritation. In fact, it had all been left very far from clear, suspicious indeed. According to her account, the quarrel had arisen from Liza's obstinate and ironical character. Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch is proud too, and though he was very much in love, yet he could not endure sarcasm, and began to be sarcastic himself. Soon afterwards we made the acquaintance of a young man, the nephew, I believe, of your professor, and indeed the surname's the same. The son, not the nephew, Varvara Petrovna corrected her. Even in old days Praskovya Ivanovna had been always unable to recall Stepan Trofimovitch's name, and had always called him "the professor." "Well, his son then, so much the better." "Of course, it's all the same to me. An ordinary young man, very lively and free in his manners, but nothing special in him." "Well, then, Liza herself did wrong. She made friends with the young man with the idea of making Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch jealous." "I don't see much harm in that. It's the way of girls, quite usual, even charming in them. Only instead of being jealous, Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch made friends with the young man himself, just as though he saw nothing and didn't care." This made Liza furious. The young man soon went away (he was in a great hurry to get somewhere), and Liza took to picking quarrels with Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch at every opportunity. She noticed that he used sometimes to talk to Dasha. And, well, she got in such a frantic state that even my life wasn't worth living, my dear. The doctors have forbidden my being irritated. I was so sick of their lake they make such a fuss about. It simply gave me toothache, I had such rheumatism. It's stated in print that the Lake of Geneva does give people the toothache. It's a feature of the place. Then Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch suddenly got a letter from the countess, and he left us at once. He packed up in one day. They parted in a friendly way, and Liza became very cheerful and frivolous, and laughed a great deal seeing him off, only that was all put on. When he had gone she became very thoughtful, and she gave up speaking of him altogether, and wouldn't let me mention his name. And I should advise you, dear Varvara Petrovna, not to approach the subject with Liza, you'll only do harm. But if you hold your tongue she'll begin to talk of it herself, and then you'll learn more. I believe they'll come together again, if only Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch doesn't put off coming as he promised. I'll write to him at once. If that's how it was, there was nothing in the quarrel, all nonsense. And I know Darya too well. It's nonsense. I'm sorry for what I said about Dashenka. I did wrong. Their conversations were quite ordinary, and they talked out loud too. But it all upset me so much at the time, my dear. And Liza, I saw, got on with her again as affectionately as before. That very day Varvara Petrovna wrote to Nikolay and begged him to come, if only for 1 month, earlier than the date he had fixed. But yet she still felt that there was something unexplained and obscure in the matter. She pondered over it all the evening and all night. Praskovya's opinion seemed to her too innocent and sentimental. "Praskovya has always been too sentimental from the old school days upwards," she reflected. "Nicolas is not the man to run away from a girl's taunts. There's some other reason for it if there really has been a breach between them. That officer's here, though; they've brought him with them. As a relation he lives in their house. And as for Darya, Praskovya was in too much haste to apologise. She must have kept something to herself which she wouldn't tell me." By the morning Varvara Petrovna had matured a project for putting a stop once for all to one misunderstanding at least, a project amazing in its unexpectedness. What was in her heart when she conceived it? It would be hard to decide, and I will not undertake to explain beforehand all the incongruities of which it was made up. I simply confine myself as chronicler to recording events precisely as they happened, and it is not my fault if they seem incredible. Yet I must once more testify that by the morning there was not the least suspicion of Dasha left in Varvara Petrovna's mind, though in reality there never had been any; she had too much confidence in her. Besides, she could not admit the idea that Nicolas could be attracted by her Darya. Next morning when Darya Pavlovna was pouring out tea at the table, Varvara Petrovna looked for a long while intently at her, and perhaps for the 20th time since the previous day repeated to herself, "It's all nonsense." All she noticed was that Dasha looked rather tired, and that she was even quieter and more apathetic than she used to be. After their morning tea, according to their invariable custom, they sat down to needlework. Varvara Petrovna demanded from her a full account of her impressions abroad, especially of nature, of the inhabitants, of the towns, the customs, their arts and commerce, of everything she had time to observe. She asked no questions about the Drozdovs or how she had got on with them. Dasha, sitting beside her at the work table helping her with the embroidery, talked for half an hour in her even, monotonous, but rather weak voice. "Darya," Varvara Petrovna interrupted suddenly, "is there nothing special you want to tell me?" "No, nothing," said Dasha, after a moment's thought, and she glanced at Varvara Petrovna with her light coloured eyes. "Nothing on your soul, on your heart, or your conscience?" "Nothing," Dasha repeated, quietly, but with a sort of sullen firmness. "I knew there wasn't. Believe me, Darya, I shall never doubt you. Now sit still and listen. In front of me on that chair, I want to see the whole of you. That's right. Listen, do you want to be married?" Dasha responded with a long, inquiring, but not greatly astonished look. "Stay, hold your tongue. In the first place, there is a very great difference in age, but of course you know better than anyone what nonsense that is. You're a sensible girl, and there must be no mistakes in your life. Besides, he's still a handsome man. In short, Stepan Trofimovitch, for whom you have always had such a respect." "Well?" Dasha looked at her still more inquiringly, and this time not simply with surprise; she blushed perceptibly. "Stay, hold your tongue, don't be in a hurry. Though you will have money under my will, yet when I die, what will become of you, even if you have money? You'll be deceived and robbed of your money, you'll be lost, in fact. But married to him, you're the wife of a distinguished man. Look at him on the other hand. though I've provided for him, if I die what will become of him? But I could trust him to you. Stay, I've not finished. He's frivolous, shilly-shally, cruel, egoistic, he has low habits. But mind you think highly of him, in the first place because there are many worse. I don't want to get you off my hands by marrying you to a rascal. You don't imagine anything of that sort, do you? And above all, because I ask you, you'll think highly of him." She broke off suddenly and irritably. "Do you hear? Why won't you say anything?" Dasha still listened and did not speak. "Stay, wait a little. He's an old woman, but you know that's all the better for you. Besides, he's a pathetic old woman. He doesn't deserve to be loved by a woman at all, but he deserves to be loved for his helplessness, and you must love him for his helplessness. You understand me, don't you? Do you understand me?" Dasha nodded her head affirmatively. "I knew you would. I expected as much of you. He will love you because he ought. He ought. He ought to adore you." Varvara Petrovna almost shrieked with peculiar exasperation. "Besides, he will be in love with you without any 'ought' about it. I know him. And another thing, I shall always be here. You may be sure I shall always be here. He will complain of you, he'll begin to say things against you behind your back, he'll whisper things against you to any stray person he meets, he'll be forever whining and whining. He'll write you letters from one room to another, 2 a day. But he won't be able to get on without you all the same, and that's the chief thing. Make him obey you. If you can't make him, you'll be a fool. He'll want to hang himself and threaten to... Don't you believe it. It's nothing but nonsense. Don't believe it. But still keep a sharp look-out, you never can tell, and one day he may hang himself. It does happen with people like that. It's not through strength of will, but through weakness that people hang themselves, and so never drive him to an extreme. That's the first rule in married life. Remember, too, that he's a poet. Listen, Dasha, there's no greater happiness than self-sacrifice. And besides, you'll be giving me great satisfaction, and that's the chief thing. Don't think I've been talking nonsense. I understand what I'm saying. I'm an egoist, you be an egoist too. Of course I'm not forcing you, it's entirely for you to decide. As you say, so it shall be. Well, what's the good of sitting like this? Speak!" "I don't mind, Varvara Petrovna, if I really must be married," said Dasha firmly. "Must? What are you hinting at?" Varvara Petrovna looked sternly and intently at her. Dasha was silent, picking at her embroidery canvas with her needle. "Though you're a clever girl, you're talking nonsense. Though it is true that I have certainly set my heart on marrying you, yet it's not because it's necessary, but simply because the idea has occurred to me, and only to Stepan Trofimovitch. If it had not been for Stepan Trofimovitch, I should not have thought of marrying you yet, though you are 20. Well?" "I'll do as you wish, Varvara Petrovna." "Then you consent. Stay, be quiet. Why are you in such a hurry? I haven't finished. In my will I've left you 15,000 roubles. I'll give you that at once on your wedding day. You will give 8,000 of it to him, that is, not to him, but to me. He has a debt of 8,000. I'll pay it, but he must know that it is done with your money. You'll have 7,000 left in your hands. Never let him touch a farthing of it. Don't pay his debts ever. If once you pay them, you'll never be free of them. Besides, I shall always be here. You shall have 1,200 roubles a year from me, with extras, 1,500, besides board and lodging, which shall be at my expense, just as he has it now. Only you must set up your own servants. Your yearly allowance shall be paid to you all at once, straight into your hands. But be kind, and sometimes give him something, and let his friends come to see him once a week, but if they come more often, turn them out. But I shall be here too. And if I die, your pension will go on till his death, do you hear? Till his death, for it's his pension, not yours. And besides the 7,000 you'll have now, which you ought to keep untouched if you're not foolish, I'll leave you another 8,000 in my will, and you'll get nothing more than that from me, it's right that you should know it. Come, you consent, eh? Will you say something at last?" "I have told you already, Varvara Petrovna." "Remember that you're free to decide. As you like, so it shall be." "Then, may I ask, Varvara Petrovna, has Stepan Trofimovitch said anything yet?" "No, he hasn't said anything, he doesn't know. But he will speak directly." She jumped up at once and threw on a black shawl. Dasha flushed a little again, and watched her with questioning eyes. Varvara Petrovna turned suddenly to her with a face flaming with anger. "You're a fool!" She swooped down on her like a hawk. An ungrateful fool! What's in your mind? Can you imagine that I'd compromise you in any way, in the smallest degree? Why, he shall crawl on his knees to ask you. He must be dying of happiness. That's how it shall be arranged. Why, you know that I'd never let you suffer. Or do you suppose he'll take you for the sake of that 8,000, and that I'm hurrying off to sell you? You're a fool, a fool! You're all ungrateful fools. Give me my umbrella." And she flew off to walk by the wet brick pavements and the wooden planks to Stepan Trofimovitch's. End of Chapter 2, Section 6. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 1, Chapter 2, Sections 7 and 8 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky, translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 2, Section 7. It was true that she would never have let Dasha suffer. On the contrary, she considered now that she was acting as her benefactress. The most generous and legitimate indignation was glowing in her soul when, as she put on her shawl, she caught fixed upon her the embarrassed and mistrustful eyes of her protégée. She had genuinely loved the girl from her childhood upwards. Praskovya Ivanovna had with justice called Darya Pavlovna her favourite. Long ago Varvara Petrovna had made up her mind once for all that Darya's disposition was not like her brother's, not, that is, like Ivan Shatov's; that she was quiet and gentle, and capable of great self‐sacrifice; that she was distinguished by a power of devotion, unusual modesty, rare reasonableness, and, above all, by gratitude. Till that time Dasha had, to all appearances, completely justified her expectations. "In that life there will be no mistakes," said Varvara Petrovna when the girl was only 12 years old, and as it was characteristic of her to attach herself doggedly and passionately to any dream that fascinated her, any new design, any idea that struck her as noble, she made up her mind at once to educate Dasha as though she were her own daughter. She at once set aside a sum of money for her and sent for a governess, Miss Criggs, who lived with them until the girl was 16. But she was for some reason suddenly dismissed. Teachers came for her from the high school, among them a real Frenchman who taught Dasha French. He, too, was suddenly dismissed, almost turned out of the house. A poor lady, a widow of good family, taught her to play the piano, yet her chief tutor was Stepan Trofimovitch. In reality he first discovered Dasha. He began teaching the quiet child even before Varvara Petrovna had begun to think about her. I repeat again, it was wonderful how children took to him. Lizaveta Nikolaevna Tushin had been taught by him from the age of 8 till 11. Stepan Trofimovitch took no fees, of course, for his lessons and would not on any account have taken payment from the Drozdovs. But he fell in love with the charming child, and used to tell her poems of a sort about the creation of the world, about the earth, and the history of humanity. His lectures about the primitive peoples and primitive man were more interesting than the Arabian Nights. Liza, who was ecstatic over these stories, used to mimic Stepan Trofimovitch very funnily at home. He heard of this and once peeped in on her unawares. Liza, overcome with confusion, flung herself into his arms and shed tears. Stepan Trofimovitch wept too with delight. But Liza soon after went away, and only Dasha was left. When Dasha began to have other teachers, Stepan Trofimovitch gave up his lessons with her, and by degrees left off noticing her. Things went on like this for a long time. Once, when she was 17, he was struck by her prettiness. It happened at Varvara Petrovna's table. He began to talk to the young girl, was much pleased with her answers, and ended by offering to give her a serious and comprehensive course of lessons on the history of Russian literature. Varvara Petrovna approved, and thanked him for his excellent idea, and Dasha was delighted. Stepan Trofimovitch proceeded to make special preparations for the lectures, and at last they began. They began with the most ancient period. The first lecture went off enchantingly. Varvara Petrovna was present. When Stepan Trofimovitch had finished, and as he was going informed his pupil that the next time he would deal with the story of the expedition of Igor, Varvara Petrovna suddenly got up and announced that there would be no more lessons. Stepan Trofimovitch winced, but said nothing, and Dasha flushed crimson. It put a stop to the scheme, however. This had happened just 3 years before Varvara Petrovna's unexpected fancy. Poor Stepan Trofimovitch was sitting alone, free from all misgivings. Plunged in mournful reveries, he had for some time been looking out of the window to see whether any of his friends were coming. But nobody would come. It was drizzling. It was turning cold. He would have to have the stove heated. He sighed. Suddenly a terrible apparition flashed upon his eyes. Varvara Petrovna in such weather and at such an unexpected hour to see him, and on foot! He was so astounded that he forgot to put on his coat, and received her as he was, in his everlasting pink wadded dressing jacket. "Ma bonne amie!" he cried faintly to greet her. "You're alone. I'm glad. I can't endure your friends. How you do smoke! Heavens, what an atmosphere! You haven't finished your morning tea, and it's nearly 12 o'clock. It's your idea of bliss, disorder. You take pleasure in dirt. What's that torn paper on the floor? Nastasya, Nastasya, what is your Nastasya about? Open the window, the casement, the doors, fling everything wide open, and we'll go into the drawing room. I've come to you on a matter of importance, and you sweep up, my good woman, for once in your life." "They make such a muck," Nastasya whined in a voice of plaintive exasperation. "Well, you must sweep, sweep it up 15 times a day. You've a wretched drawing room," when they had gone into the drawing room. "Shut the door properly. She'll be listening. You must have it repapered. Didn't I send a paper hanger to you with patterns? Why didn't you choose one? Sit down and listen. Do sit down, I beg you. Where are you off to? Where are you off to? Where are you off to?" "I'll be back directly," Stepan Trofimovitch cried from the next room. "Here I am again." "Ah, you've changed your coat." She scanned him mockingly. He had flung his coat on over the dressing jacket. "Well, certainly, that's more suited to our subject. Do sit down, I entreat you." She told him everything at once, abruptly and impressively. She hinted at the 8,000 of which he stood in such terrible need. She told him in detail of the dowry. Stepan Trofimovitch sat trembling, opening his eyes wider and wider. He heard it all, but he could not realise it clearly. He tried to speak, but his voice kept breaking. All he knew was that everything would be as she said, that to protest and refuse to agree would be useless, and that he was a married man irrevocably. "Mais, ma bonne amie, for the third time, and at my age, and to such a child!" he brought out at last. "Mais c'est un enfant!" "A child who is 20 years old, thank God. Please don't roll your eyes, I entreat you. You're not on the stage. You're very clever and learned, but you know nothing at all about life. You will always want a nurse to look after you. I shall die, and what will become of you? She will be a good nurse to you. She's a modest girl, strong willed, reasonable. Besides, I shall be here too. I shan't die directly. She's fond of home, she's an angel of gentleness. This happy thought came to me in Switzerland. Do you understand if I tell you myself that she is an angel of gentleness?" she screamed with sudden fury. "Your house is dirty. She will bring in order, cleanliness. Everything will shine like a mirror. Good gracious! Do you expect me to go on my knees to you with such a treasure, to enumerate all the advantages, to court you? Why, you ought to be on your knees, oh, you shallow, shallow, faint-hearted man!" "But I'm an old man." "What do your 53 years matter? 50 is the middle of life, not the end of it. You are a handsome man, and you know it yourself. You know, too, what a respect she has for you. If I die, what will become of her? But married to you she'll be at peace, and I shall be at peace. You have renown, a name, a loving heart. You receive a pension which I look upon as an obligation. You will save her, perhaps, you will save her. In any case you will be doing her an honour. You will form her for life, you will develop her heart, you will direct her ideas. How many people come to grief nowadays because their ideas are wrongly directed? By that time your book will be ready and you will at once set people talking about you again." "I am, in fact," he muttered, at once flattered by Varvara Petrovna's adroit insinuations, "I was just preparing to sit down to my 'Tales from Spanish History.'" "Well, there you are. It's just come right." "But she? Have you spoken to her?" "Don't worry about her, and there's no need for you to be inquisitive. Of course you must ask her yourself, entreat her to do you the honour, you understand. But don't be uneasy, I shall be here. Besides, you love her." Stepan Trofimovitch felt giddy. The walls were going round. There was one terrible idea underlying this to which he could not reconcile himself. "Excellent ami," his voice quivered suddenly, "I could never have conceived that you would make up your mind to give me in marriage to... another woman." "You're not a girl, Stepan Trofimovitch. Only girls are given in marriage. You are taking a wife." Varvara Petrovna hissed malignantly. "Oui, j'ai pris un mot pour un autre, mais c'est égal." He gazed at her with a hopeless air. "I see that c'est égal," she muttered contemptuously through her teeth. "Good heavens! Why, he's going to faint! Nastasya, Nastasya, water!" But water was not needed. He came to himself. Varvara Petrovna took up her umbrella. "I see it's no use talking to you now." "Oui, oui, je suis incapable." "But by to morrow you'll have rested and thought it over. Stay at home. If anything happens, let me know, even if it's at night. Don't write letters, I shan't read them. To morrow I'll come in again at this time alone for a final answer, and I trust it will be satisfactory. Try to have nobody here and no untidiness, for the place isn't fit to be seen. Nastasya, Nastasya!" The next day, of course, he consented, and indeed he could do nothing else. There was one circumstance... VIII. Stepan Trofimovitch's estate, as we used to call it, which consisted of 50 souls, reckoning in the old fashion, and bordered on Skvoreshniki, was not really his at all, but his first wife's, and so belonged now to his son Pyotr Stepanovitch Verhovensky. Stepan Trofimovitch was simply his trustee. And so, when the nestling was full‐fledged, he had given his father a formal authorization to manage the estate. This transaction was a profitable one for the young man. He received as much as 1,000 roubles a year by way of revenue from the estate, though under the new regime it could not have yielded more than 500, and possibly not that. God knows how such an arrangement had arisen. The whole sum, however, was sent the young man by Varvara Petrovna, and Stepan Trofimovitch had nothing to do with a single rouble of it. On the other hand, the whole revenue from the land remained in his pocket, and he had, besides, completely ruined the estate, letting it to a mercenary rogue, and without the knowledge of Varvara Petrovna, selling the timber which gave the estate its chief value. He had some time before he sold the woods bit by bit. It was worth at least 8,000, yet he had only received 5,000 for it. But he sometimes lost too much at the club and was afraid to ask Varvara Petrovna for the money. She clenched her teeth when she heard at last of everything. And now, all at once, his son announced that he was coming himself to sell his property for what he could get for it, and commissioned his father to take steps promptly to arrange the sale. It was clear that Stepan Trofimovitch, being a generous and disinterested man, felt ashamed of his treatment of "ce cher enfant," whom he had seen for the last time 9 years before as a student in Petersburg. The estate might originally have been worth 13 or 14,000. Now it was doubtful whether any one would give 5 for it. No doubt Stepan Trofimovitch was fully entitled by the terms of the trust to sell the wood, and taking into account the incredibly large yearly revenue of 1,000 roubles, which had been sent punctually for so many years, he could have put up a good defence of his management. But Stepan Trofimovitch was a generous man of exalted impulses. A wonderfully fine inspiration occurred to his mind. When Petrusha returned, to lay on the table before him the maximum price of 15,000 roubles without a hint at the sums that had been sent him hitherto, and warmly and with tears to press "ces chères filles" to his heart, and so to make an end of all accounts between them. He began cautiously and indirectly unfolding this picture before Varvara Petrovna. He hinted that this would add a peculiarly noble note to their friendship, to their idea. This would set the parents of the last generation, and people of the last generation generally, in such a disinterested and magnanimous light in comparison with the new frivolous and socialistic younger generation. He said a great deal more, but Varvara Petrovna was obstinately silent. At last she informed him airily that she was prepared to buy their estate and to pay for it the maximum price, that is 6 or 7,000, though 4 would have been a fair price for it. Of the remaining 8,000 which had vanished with the woods she said not a word. This conversation took place a month before the match was proposed to him. Stepan Trofimovitch was overwhelmed and began to ponder. There might in the past have been a hope that his son would not come, after all an outsider, that is to say, might have hoped so. Stepan Trofimovitch, as a father, would have indignantly rejected the insinuation that he could entertain such a hope. Anyway, queer rumours had hitherto been reaching us about Petrusha. To begin with, on completing his studies at the university 6 years before, he had hung about in Petersburg without getting work. Suddenly we got the news that he had taken part in issuing some anonymous manifesto, and that he was implicated in the affair. Then he suddenly turned up abroad in Switzerland at Geneva; he had escaped very likely. "It's surprising to me," Stepan Trofimovitch commented, greatly disconcerted. "Petrusha, c'est une si pauvre tête. He's good, noble hearted, very sensitive, and I was so delighted with him in Petersburg, comparing him with the young people of to day. But c'est une pauvre sœur tout de même, and you know it all comes from that same half‐bakedness, that sentimentality. They are fascinated, not by realism, but by the emotional ideal side of socialism, by the religious note in it, so to say, by the poetry of it. Second hand, of course. And for me, think what it means. I have so many enemies here and more still there. They'll put it down to the father's influence. Good God! Petrusha a revolutionist? What times we live in!" Very soon, however, Petrusha sent his exact address from Switzerland for money to be sent to him as usual, so he could not be exactly an exile. And now, after 4 years abroad, he was suddenly making his appearance again in his own country, and announced that he would arrive shortly, so there could be no charge against him. What was more, some one seemed to be interested in him and protecting him. He wrote now from the south of Russia, where he was busily engaged in some private but important business. All this was capital, but where was his father to get that other 7 or 8,000 to make up a suitable price for the estate? And what if there should be an outcry, and instead of that imposing picture it should come to a lawsuit? Something told Stepan Trofimovitch that the sensitive Petrusha would not relinquish anything that was to his interest. "Why is it, as I've noticed," Stepan Trofimovitch whispered to me once, "why is it that all these desperate socialists and communists are at the same time such incredible skinflints, so avaricious, so keen over property? And in fact the more socialistic, the more extreme they are, the keener they are over property. Why is it? Can that too come from sentimentalism?" I don't know whether there is any truth in this observation of Stepan Trofimovitch's. I only know that Petrusha had somehow got wind of the sale of the woods and the rest of it, and that Stepan Trofimovitch was aware of the fact. I happened, too, to read some of Petrusha's letters to his father. He wrote extremely rarely, once a year or even less often. Only recently, to inform him of his approaching visit, he had sent 2 letters, one almost immediately after the other. All his letters were short, dry, consisting only of instructions, and as the father and son had, since their meeting in Petersburg, adopted the fashionable thou and thee, Petrusha's letters had a striking resemblance to the missives that used to be sent by landowners of the old school from the town to their serfs whom they had left in charge of their estates. And now suddenly this 8,000, which would solve the difficulty, would be wafted to him by Varvara Petrovna's proposition. And at the same time she made him distinctly feel that it never could be wafted to him from anywhere else. Of course Stepan Trofimovitch consented. He sent for me directly she had gone, and shut himself up for the whole day, admitting no one else. He cried, of course, talked well, and talked a great deal, contradicted himself continually, made a casual pun, and was much pleased with it. Then he had a slight attack of his summer cholera, everything in fact followed the usual course. Then he brought out the portrait of his German bride, now 20 years deceased, and began plaintively appealing to her, "Will you forgive me?" In fact he seemed somehow distracted. Our grief led us to get a little drunk. He soon fell into a sweet sleep, however. Next morning he tied his cravat in masterly fashion, dressed with care, and went frequently to look at himself in the glass. He sprinkled his handkerchief with scent, only a slight dash of it, however, and as soon as he saw Varvara Petrovna out of the window, he hurriedly took another handkerchief and hid the scented one under the pillow. "Excellent," Varvara Petrovna approved on receiving his consent. "In the first place you show a fine decision, and secondly you've listened to the voice of reason, to which you generally pay so little heed in your private affairs. There's no need of haste, however," she added, scanning the knot of his white tie. "For the present say nothing, and I will say nothing. It will soon be your birthday. I will come to see you with her. Give us tea in the evening, and please without wine or other refreshments. But I'll arrange it all myself. Invite your friends, but we'll make the list together. You can talk to her the day before, if necessary, and at your party we won't exactly announce it or make an engagement of any sort, but only hint at it and let people know without any sort of ceremony. And then the wedding a fortnight later, as far as possible without any fuss. You two might even go away for a time after the wedding, to Moscow for instance. I'll go with you too, perhaps. The chief thing is, keep quiet till then." Stepan Trofimovitch was surprised. He tried to falter that he could not do like that, that he must talk it over with his bride. But Varvara Petrovna flew at him in exasperation. "What for? In the first place it may perhaps come to nothing." "Come to nothing!" muttered the bridegroom, utterly dumbfoundered. "Yes, I'll see, but everything shall be as I've told you, and don't be uneasy. I'll prepare her myself, there's really no need for you. Everything necessary shall be said and done, and there's no need for you to meddle. Why should you? In what character? Don't come and don't write letters. And not a sight or sound of you, I beg. I will be silent too." She absolutely refused to explain herself, and went away, obviously upset. Stepan Trofimovitch's excessive readiness evidently impressed her. Alas, he was utterly unable to grasp his position, and the question had not yet presented itself to him from certain other points of view. On the contrary, a new note was apparent in him, a sort of conquering and jaunty air. He swaggered. "I do like that!" he exclaimed, standing before me and flinging wide his arms. "Did you hear? She wants to drive me to refusing at last. Why, I may lose patience too, and refuse. Sit still, there's no need for you to go to her. But after all, why should I be married? Simply because she's taken an absurd fancy into her heart? But I'm a serious man, and I can refuse to submit to the idle whims of a giddy woman. I have duties to my son and to myself. I'm making a sacrifice. Does she realise that? I have agreed, perhaps, because I am weary of life and nothing matters to me. But she may exasperate me, and then it will matter. I shall resent it and refuse. Et enfin les ridicules. What will they say at the club? What will Liputin say? Perhaps nothing will come of it. What a thing to say! That beats everything. That's really... What is one to say to that? Je suis un forçat, un badinguet, un man pushed to the wall. And at the same time a sort of capricious complacency, something frivolous and playful, could be seen in the midst of all these plaintive exclamations. In the evening we drank too much again. End of Chapter 2. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part 1, Chapter 3, Sections 1 and 2 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 3, The Sins of Others. Section 1. About a week had passed, and the position had begun to grow more complicated. I may mention in passing that I suffered a great deal during that unhappy week, as I scarcely left the side of my affianced friend in the capacity of his most intimate confidant. What weighed upon him most was the feeling of shame, though we saw no one all that week and sat indoors alone. But he was even ashamed before me, and so much so that the more he confided to me the more vexed he was with me for it. He was so morbidly apprehensive that he expected that every one knew about it already, the whole town, and was afraid to show himself not only at the club but even in his circle of friends. He positively would not go out to take his constitutional till well after dusk, when it was quite dark. A week passed and he still did not know whether he were betrothed or not. and could not find out for a fact, however much he tried. He had not yet seen his future bride, and did not know whether she was to be his bride or not, did not, in fact, know whether there was anything serious in it at all. Varvara Petrovna, for some reason, resolutely refused to admit him to her presence. In answer to one of his first letters to her, and he wrote a great number of them, she begged him plainly to spare her all communications with him for a time, because she was very busy, and having a great deal of the utmost importance to communicate to him, she was waiting for a more free moment to do so, and that she would let him know in time when he could come to see her. She declared she would send back his letters unopened, as they were simple self indulgence. I read that letter myself; he showed it me. Yet all this harshness and indefiniteness were nothing compared with his chief anxiety. That anxiety tormented him to the utmost and without ceasing. He grew thin and dispirited through it. It was something of which he was more ashamed than of anything else, and of which he would not on any account speak, even to me. On the contrary, he lied on occasion and shuffled before me like a little boy. And at the same time he sent for me himself every day, could not stay 2 hours without me, needing me as much as air or water. Such conduct rather wounded my vanity. I need hardly say that I had long ago privately guessed this great secret of his, and saw through it completely. It was my firmest conviction at the time that the revelation of this secret, this chief anxiety of Stepan Trofimovitch's, would not have redounded to his credit, and therefore, as I was still young, I was rather indignant at the coarseness of his feelings and the ugliness of some of his suspicions. In my warmth, and, I must confess, in my weariness of being his confidant, I perhaps blamed him too much. I was so cruel as to try and force him to confess it all to me himself, though I did recognise that it might be difficult to confess some things. He, too, saw through me. That is, he clearly perceived that I saw through him, and that I was angry with him indeed, and he was angry with me too for being angry with him and seeing through him. My irritation was perhaps petty and stupid, but the unrelieved solitude of two friends together is sometimes extremely prejudicial to true friendship. From a certain point of view he had a very true understanding of some aspects of his position, and defined it indeed very subtly on those points about which he did not think it necessary to be secret. "Oh, how different she was then," he would sometimes say to me about Varvara Petrovna. "How different she was in the old days when we used to talk together. Do you know that she could talk in those days? Can you believe that she had ideas in those days, original ideas? Now everything has changed. She says all that's only old fashioned twaddle. She despises the past. Now she's like some shopman or cashier. She has grown hard hearted, and she's always cross." "Why is she cross now, if you are carrying out her orders?" I answered. He looked at me subtly. Cher ami, if I had not agreed she would have been dreadfully angry, dreadfully, but yet less than now that I have consented. He was pleased with this saying of his, and we emptied a bottle between us that evening. But that was only for a moment; next day he was worse and more ill humoured than ever. But what I was most vexed with him for was that he could not bring himself to call on the Drozdovs, as he should have done on their arrival, to renew the acquaintance of which, so we heard they were themselves desirous, since they kept asking about him. It was a source of daily distress to him. He talked of Lizaveta Nikolaevna with an ecstasy which I was at a loss to understand. No doubt he remembered in her the child whom he had once loved; but besides that, he imagined for some unknown reason that he would at once find in her company a solace for his present misery, and even the solution of his more serious doubts. He expected to meet in Lizaveta Nikolaevna an extraordinary being. And yet he did not go to see her, though he meant to do so every day. The worst of it was that I was desperately anxious to be presented to her and to make her acquaintance, and I could look to no one but Stepan Trofimovitch to effect this. I was frequently meeting her, in the street of course, when she was out riding, wearing a riding habit and mounted on a fine horse, and accompanied by her cousin, so called, a handsome officer, the nephew of the late General Drozdov, and these meetings made an extraordinary impression on me at the time. My infatuation lasted only a moment, and I very soon afterwards recognised the impossibility of my dreams myself. but though it was a fleeting impression, it was a very real one, and so it may well be imagined how indignant I was at the time with my poor friend for keeping so obstinately secluded. All the members of our circle had been officially informed from the beginning that Stepan Trofimovitch would see nobody for a time, and begged them to leave him quite alone. He insisted on sending round a circular notice to this effect, though I tried to dissuade him. I went round to every one at his request, and told everybody that Varvara Petrovna had given "our old man," as we all used to call Stepan Trofimovitch among ourselves, a special job to arrange and order some correspondence lasting over many years; that he had shut himself up to do it, and I was helping him. Liputin was the only one I did not have time to visit, and I kept putting it off. To tell the real truth, I was afraid to go to him. I knew beforehand that he would not believe one word of my story, that he would certainly imagine that there was some secret at the bottom of it, which they were trying to hide from him alone, and as soon as I left him he would set to work to make inquiries and gossip all over the town. While I was picturing all this to myself I happened to run across him in the street. It turned out that he had heard all about it from our friends, whom I had only just informed; but strange to say, instead of being inquisitive and asking questions about Stepan Trofimovitch, he interrupted me when I began apologising for not having come to him before, and at once passed to other subjects. It is true that he had a great deal stored up to tell me; he was in a state of great excitement, and was delighted to have got hold of me for a listener. He began talking of the news of the town, of the arrival of the governor's wife, with new topics of conversation, of an opposition party already formed in the club, of how they were all in a hubbub over the new ideas, and how charmingly this suited him, and so on. He talked for a quarter of an hour, and so amusingly that I could not tear myself away. Though I could not endure him, yet I must admit he had the gift of making one listen to him, especially when he was very angry at something. This man was, in my opinion, a regular spy from his very nature. At every moment he knew the very latest gossip and all the trifling incidents of our town, especially the unpleasant ones, and it was surprising to me how he took things to heart that were sometimes absolutely no concern of his. It always seemed to me that the leading feature of his character was envy. When I told Stepan Trofimovitch the same evening of my meeting Liputin that morning and our conversation, the latter to my amazement became greatly agitated and asked me the wild question: "Does Liputin know or not?" I began trying to prove that there was no possibility of his finding it out so soon, and that there was nobody from whom he could hear it. But Stepan Trofimovitch was not to be shaken. "Well, you may believe it or not," he concluded unexpectedly at last, "but I'm convinced that he not only knows every detail of our position, but that he knows something else besides, something neither you nor I know yet, and perhaps never shall, or shall only know when it's too late, when there's no turning back." I said nothing, but these words suggested a great deal. For 5 whole days after that we did not say one word about Liputin. It was clear to me that Stepan Trofimovitch greatly regretted having let his tongue run away with him, and having revealed such suspicions before me. Section 2. One morning, on the seventh or eighth day after Stepan Trofimovitch had consented to become engaged, about 11 o'clock, when I was hurrying as usual to my afflicted friend, I had an adventure on the way. I met Karmazinov, the great writer, as Liputin called him. I had read Karmazinov from a child. His novels and tales were well known to the past and even to the present generation. I revelled in them; they were the great enjoyment of my childhood and youth. Afterwards I grew rather less enthusiastic over his work. I did not care so much for the novels with a purpose which he had been writing of late, as for his first, early works which were so full of spontaneous poetry, and his latest publications I had not liked at all. Speaking generally, if I may venture to express my opinion on so delicate a subject, all these talented gentlemen of the middling sort, who are sometimes in their lifetime accepted almost as geniuses, pass out of memory quite suddenly and without a trace when they die. And what's more, it often happens that even during their lifetime, as soon as a new generation grows up and takes the place of the one in which they have flourished, they are forgotten and neglected by every one in an incredibly short time. This somehow happens among us quite suddenly, like the shifting of the scenes on the stage. Oh, it's not at all the same as with Pushkin, Gogol, Molière, Voltaire, all those great men who really had a new original word to say. It's true, too, that these talented gentlemen of the middling sort, in the decline of their venerable years, usually write themselves out in the most pitiful way, though they don't observe the fact themselves. It happens not infrequently that a writer who has been for a long time credited with extraordinary profundity, and expected to exercise a great and serious influence on the progress of society, betrays in the end such poverty, such insipidity in his fundamental ideas, that no one regrets that he succeeded in writing himself out so soon. But the old greybeards don't notice this, and are angry. Their vanity sometimes, especially towards the end of their career, reaches proportions that may well provoke wonder. God knows what they begin to take themselves for gods at least. People used to say about Karmazinov that his connections with aristocratic society and powerful personages were dearer to him than his own soul. People used to say that on meeting you he would be cordial, that he would fascinate and enchant you with his open heartedness, especially if you were of use to him in some way, and if you came to him with some preliminary recommendation; but that before any stray prince, any stray countess, any one that he was afraid of, he would regard it as his sacred duty to forget your existence with the most insulting carelessness, like a chip of wood, like a fly, before you had even time to get out of his sight. He seriously considered this the best and most aristocratic style. In spite of the best of breeding and perfect knowledge of good manners, he is, they say, vain to such an hysterical pitch that he cannot conceal his irritability as an author even in those circles of society where little interest is taken in literature. If any one were to surprise him by being indifferent, he would be morbidly chagrined and try to revenge himself. A year before I had read an article of his in a review, written with an immense affectation of naïve poetry and psychology too. He described the wreck of some steamer on the English coast, of which he had been the witness, and how he had seen the drowning people saved and the dead bodies brought ashore. All this rather long and verbose article was written solely with the object of self display. One seemed to read between the lines, "Concentrate yourselves on me. Behold what I was like at those moments. What are the sea, the storm, the rocks, the splinters of wrecked ships to you? I have described all that sufficiently to you with my mighty pen. Why look at that drowned woman with the dead child in her dead arms? Look rather at me. See how I was unable to bear that sight and turned away from it. Here I stood with my back to it. Here I was horrified and could not bring myself to look. I blinked my eyes. Isn't that interesting?" When I told Stepan Trofimovitch my opinion of Karmazinov's article, he quite agreed with me. When rumours had reached us of late that Karmazinov was coming to the neighbourhood, I was, of course, very eager to see him, and, if possible, to make his acquaintance. I knew that this might be done through Stepan Trofimovitch, they had once been friends. And now I suddenly met him at the cross roads I knew him at once. He had been pointed out to me 2 or 3 days before when he drove past with the governor's wife. He was a short, stiff looking old man, though not over 55, with a rather red little face, with thick grey locks of hair clustering under his chimney pot hat and curling round his clean little pink ears. His clean little face was not altogether handsome, with its thin, long, crafty looking lips, with its rather fleshy nose, and its sharp, shrewd little eyes. He was dressed somewhat shabbily in a sort of cape, such as would be worn in Switzerland or North Italy at that time of year; but at any rate all the minor details of his costume, the little studs and collar, the buttons, the tortoiseshell lorgnette on a narrow black ribbon, the signet ring, were all such as are worn by persons of the most irreproachable good form. I am certain that in summer he must have worn light prunella shoes with mother of pearl buttons at the side. When we met he was standing still at the turning and looking about him attentively. Noticing that I was looking at him with interest, he asked me in a sugary, though rather shrill voice: "Allow me to ask, which is my nearest way to Bykovy Street?" "To Bykovy Street? Oh, that's here, close by," I cried in great excitement. "Straight on along this street and the second turning to the left." "Very much obliged to you." A curse on that minute! I fancy I was shy and looked cringing. He instantly noticed all that, and of course realized it all at once. That is, realized that I knew who he was, that I had read him and revered him from a child, and that I was shy and looked at him cringingly. He smiled, nodded again, and walked on as I had directed him. I don't know why I turned back to follow him. I don't know why I ran for 10 paces beside him. He suddenly stood still again. "And could you tell me where is the nearest cab stand?" he shouted out to me again. It was a horrid shout, a horrid voice. "A cab stand? The nearest cab stand is by the cathedral. There are always cabs standing there," and I almost turned to run for a cab for him. I almost believe that that was what he expected me to do. Of course I checked myself at once and stood still, but he had noticed my movement and was still watching me with the same horrid smile. Then something happened which I shall never forget. He suddenly dropped a tiny bag which he was holding in his left hand, though indeed it was not a bag, but rather a little box, or more probably some part of a pocket book, or to be more accurate, a little reticule, rather like an old fashioned lady's reticule, though I really don't know what it was. I only know that I flew to pick it up. I am convinced that I did not really pick it up, but my first motion was unmistakable. I could not conceal it, and like a fool I turned crimson. The cunning fellow at once got all that could be got out of the circumstance. "Don't trouble, I'll pick it up," he pronounced charmingly. That is, when he was quite sure that I was not going to pick up the reticule, he picked it up as though forestalling me, nodded once more, and went his way, leaving me to look like a fool. It was as good as though I had picked it up myself. For 5 minutes I considered myself utterly disgraced for ever, but as I reached Stepan Trofimovitch's house I suddenly burst out laughing. The meeting struck me as so amusing that I immediately resolved to entertain Stepan Trofimovitch with an account of it, and even to act the whole scene to him. End of Chapter 3, Section 2. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Part One, Chapter 3, Sections 3 and 4 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 3, Section 3. But this time, to my surprise, I found an extraordinary change in him. He pounced on me with a sort of avidity, it is true, as soon as I went in and began listening to me, but with such a distracted air that at first he evidently did not take in my words. But as soon as I pronounced the name of Karmazinov he suddenly flew into a frenzy. "Don't speak of him! Don't pronounce that name!" he exclaimed, almost in a fury. "Here, look, read it, read it!" He opened the drawer and threw on the table 3 small sheets of paper, covered with a hurried pencil scrawl, all from Varvara Petrovna. The first letter was dated the day before yesterday, the second had come yesterday, and the last that day, an hour before. Their contents were quite trivial, and all referred to Karmazinov, and betrayed the vain and fussy uneasiness of Varvara Petrovna, and her apprehension that Karmazinov might forget to pay her a visit. Here is the first one dating from 2 days before. Probably there had been one also 3 days before, and possibly another 4 days before as well. "If he deigns to visit you to day, not a word about me, I beg. Not the faintest hint. Don't speak of me. Don't mention me. V.S." The letter of the day before. "If he decides to pay you a visit this morning, I think the most dignified thing would be not to receive him. That's what I think about it. I don't know what you think. V.S." Today's the last. "I feel sure that you're in a regular litter and clouds of tobacco smoke. I'm sending you Marya and Fomushka. They'll tidy you up in half an hour. And don't hinder them, but go and sit in the kitchen while they clear up. I'm sending you a Bokhara rug and 2 china vases. I've long been meaning to make you a present of them, and I'm sending you my Teniers too for a time. You can put the vases in the window and hang the Teniers on the right under the portrait of Goethe. It will be more conspicuous there, and it's always light there in the morning. If he does turn up at last, receive him with the utmost courtesy, but try and talk of trifling matters, of some intellectual subject, and behave as though you had seen each other lately. Not a word about me. Perhaps I may look in on you in the evening. V.S. P.S. If he does not come to day, he won't come at all. I read and was amazed that he was in such excitement over such trifles. Looking at him inquiringly, I noticed that he had had time while I was reading to change the everlasting white tie he always wore for a red one. His hat and stick lay on the table. He was pale, and his hands were positively trembling. "I don't care a hang about her anxieties," he cried frantically, in response to my inquiring look. "Je m'en fiche, she has a face to be excited about Karmazinov, and she does not answer my letters. Here is my unopened letter which she sent me back yesterday, here on the table under the book, under L'homme qui rit. What is it to me that she's wearing herself out over Nikolay? Je m'en fiche, et je proclame ma liberté. Au diable la Karmazinov! Au diable la Lemke! I've hidden the vases in the entry and the Teniers in the chest of drawers, and I have demanded that she is to see me at once. Do you hear? I've insisted. I've sent her just such a scrap of paper, a pencil scrawl, unsealed, by Nastasya, and I'm waiting. I want Darya Pavlovna to speak to me with her own lips before the face of heaven, or at least before you. Vous me seconderez, n'est-ce pas, comme ami et témoin? I don't want to have to blush, to lie. I don't want secrets. I won't have secrets in this matter. Let them confess everything to me openly, frankly, honourably, and then perhaps I may surprise the whole generation by my magnanimity. Am I a scoundrel or not, my dear sir?" he concluded suddenly, looking menacingly at me as though I'd considered him a scoundrel. I offered him a sip of water. I had never seen him like this before. All the while he was talking he kept running from one end of the room to the other, but he suddenly stood still before me in an extraordinary attitude. "Can you suppose," he began again with hysterical haughtiness, looking me up and down, "can you imagine that I, Stepan Verhovensky, cannot find in myself the moral strength to take my bag, my beggar's bag, and laying it on my feeble shoulders to go out at the gate and vanish for ever, when honour and the great principle of independence demand it? It's not the first time that Stepan Verhovensky has had to repel despotism by moral force, even though it be the despotism of a crazy woman, that is, the most cruel and insulting despotism which can exist on earth. Although you have, I fancy, forgotten yourself so much as to laugh at my phrase, my dear sir. Oh, you don't believe that I can find the moral strength in myself to end my life as a tutor in a merchant's family, or to die of hunger in a ditch. Answer me, answer at once. Do you believe it or don't you believe it?" But I was purposely silent. I even affected to hesitate to wound him by answering in the negative, but to be unable to answer affirmatively. In all this nervous excitement of his there was something which really did offend me, and not personally, oh no! But I will explain later on. He positively turned pale. "Perhaps you are bored with me, G (this is my surname), and you would like not to come and see me at all?" he said, in that tone of pale composure which usually precedes some extraordinary outburst. I jumped up in alarm. At that moment Nastasya came in, and without a word handed Stepan Trofimovitch a piece of paper, on which something was written in pencil. He glanced at it and flung it to me. On the paper, in Varvara Petrovna's hand, three words were written: "Stay at home." Stepan Trofimovitch snatched up his hat and stick in silence and went quickly out of the room. Mechanically I followed him. Suddenly voices and sounds of rapid footsteps were heard in the passage. He stood still as though thunderstruck. "It's Liputin, I am lost," he whispered, clutching at my arm. At the same instant Liputin walked into the room. Section 4. Why he should be lost owing to Liputin I did not know, and indeed I did not attach much significance to the words. I put it all down to his nerves. His terror, however, was remarkable, and I made up my mind to keep a careful watch on him. The very appearance of Liputin as he came in assured us that he had on this occasion a special right to come in spite of the prohibition. He brought with him an unknown gentleman who must have been a new arrival in the town. In reply to the senseless stare of my petrified friend, he called out immediately in a loud voice: "I'm bringing you a visitor, a special one. I make bold to intrude on your solitude. Mr. Kirillov, a very distinguished civil engineer. And what's more, he knows your son, the much esteemed Pyotr Stepanovitch, very intimately. And he has a message from him. He's only just arrived." "The message is your own addition," the visitor observed curtly. "There's no message at all.
but I certainly do know Verhovensky. I left him in the X province 10 days ahead of us." Stepan Trofimovitch mechanically offered his hand and motioned him to sit down. He looked at me, he looked at Liputin, and then, as though suddenly recollecting himself, sat down himself, though he still kept his hat and stick in his hands without being aware of it. "Bah, but you were just going out yourself. I was told that you were quite knocked up with work." "Yes, I'm ill. And you see I meant to go for a walk. I..." Stepan Trofimovitch checked himself, quickly flung his hat and stick on the sofa, and turned crimson. Meantime I was hurriedly examining the visitor. He was a young man, about 27, decently dressed, well made, slender and dark, with a pale, rather muddy coloured face and black lustreless eyes. He seemed rather thoughtful and absent minded, spoke jerkily and ungrammatically, transposing words in rather a strange way, and getting muddled if he attempted a sentence of any length. Liputin was perfectly aware of Stepan Trofimovitch's alarm, and was obviously pleased at it. He sat down in a wicker chair which he dragged almost into the middle of the room, so as to be at an equal distance between his host and the visitor, who had installed themselves on sofas on opposite sides of the room. His sharp eyes darted inquisitively from one corner of the room to another. "It's a long while since I've seen Petrusha. You met abroad?" Stepan Trofimovitch managed to mutter to the visitor. "Both here and abroad." "Alexey Nilitch has only just returned himself after living 4 years abroad," put in Liputin. "He has been travelling to perfect himself in his speciality, and has come to us because he has good reasons to expect a job on the building of our railway bridge, and he's now waiting for an answer about it. He knows the Drozdovs and Lizaveta Nikolaevna through Pyotr Stepanovitch." The engineer sat, as it were, with a ruffled air, and listened with awkward impatience. It seemed to me that he was angry about something. "He knows Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch too." "Do you know Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch?" inquired Stepan Trofimovitch. "I know him too." "It's a very long time since I've seen Petrusha, and I feel I have so little right to call myself a father. C'est le mot. How did you leave him?" "Oh, yes, I left him. He comes himself," replied Mr. Kirillov, in haste to be rid of the question again. He certainly was angry. "He's coming." "At last I... You see, it's very long since I've seen Petrusha." Stepan Trofimovitch could not get away from this phrase. "Now I expect my poor boy to whom I have been so much to blame, that is, I mean to say, when I left him in Petersburg, in short, I looked on him as a nonentity, quelque chose dans ce genre. He was a very nervous boy, you know, emotional and very timid. When he said his prayers going to bed, he used to bow down to the ground and make the sign of the cross on his pillow, that he might not die in the night. Je m'en souviens. Enfin, no artistic feeling whatever, not a sign of anything higher, of anything fundamental, no embryo of a future ideal. C'était comme un petit idiot, but I'm afraid I am incoherent. Excuse me, you came upon me." "You say seriously that he crossed his pillow?" the engineer asked suddenly with marked curiosity. "Yes, he used to." "All right, I just asked. Go on." Stepan Trofimovitch looked interrogatively at Liputin. "I'm very grateful to you for your visit, but I must confess I'm not in a condition just now... But allow me to ask where you are lodging." "At Filipov's in Bogoyavlensky Street." "Ah, that's where Shatov lives," I observed involuntarily. "Just so, in the very same house," cried Liputin, "only Shatov lodges above, in the attic, while he's down below at Captain Lebyadkin's. He knows Shatov too, and he knows Shatov's wife. He was very intimate with her abroad." "Comment? Do you really know anything about that unhappy marriage de ce pauvre ami and that woman?" cried Stepan Trofimovitch, carried away by sudden feeling. "You are the first man I've met who has known her personally, and if only..." "What nonsense!" the engineer snapped out, flushing all over. "How you add to things, Liputin! I've not seen Shatov's wife. I've only once seen her in the distance, and not at all close. I know Shatov. Why do you add things of all sorts?" He turned round sharply on the sofa, clutched his hat, then laid it down again, and settling himself down once more as before, fixed his angry black eyes on Stepan Trofimovitch with a sort of defiance. I was at a loss to understand such strange irritability. "Excuse me," Stepan Trofimovitch observed impressively. "I understand that it may be a very delicate subject." "No sort of delicate subject in it, and indeed it's shameful, and I didn't shout at you that it's nonsense, but at Liputin, because he adds things. Excuse me if you took it to yourself. I know Shatov, but I don't know his wife at all. I don't know her at all." "I understand, I understand. And if I insisted, it's only because I'm very fond of our poor friend, notre irascible ami, and have always taken an interest in him. In my opinion that man changed his former, possibly over youthful but yet sound ideas too abruptly. And now he says all sorts of things about Notre Sainte Russie to such a degree that I've long explained this upheaval in his old constitution. I can only call it that to some violent shock in his family life and, in fact, to his unsuccessful marriage. I, who know my poor Russia like the fingers on my hand, and have devoted my whole life to the Russian people, I can assure you that he does not know the Russian people, and what's more..." "I don't know the Russian people at all either, and I haven't time to study them," the engineer snapped out again, and again he turned sharply on the sofa. Stepan Trofimovitch was pulled up in the middle of his speech. "He is studying them, he is studying them," interposed Liputin. "He has already begun the study of them, and is writing a very interesting article dealing with the causes of the increase of suicide in Russia, and generally speaking, the causes that lead to the increase or decrease of suicide in society. He has reached amazing results." The engineer became dreadfully excited. "You have no right at all," he muttered wrathfully. "I'm not writing an article. I'm not going to do silly things. I asked you confidentially, quite by chance. There's no article at all. I'm not publishing, and you haven't the right." Liputin was obviously enjoying himself. "I beg your pardon, perhaps I made a mistake in calling your literary work an article. He is only collecting observations, and the essence of the question, or, so to say, its moral aspect, he is not touching at all. And indeed he rejects morality itself altogether, and holds with the last new principle of general destruction for the sake of ultimate good. He demands already more than 100,000,000 heads for the establishment of common sense in Europe, many more than they demanded at the last Peace Congress. Alexey Nilitch goes further than anyone in that sense." The engineer listened with a pale and contemptuous smile. For half a minute every one was silent. "All this is stupid, Liputin," Mr. Kirillov observed at last, with a certain dignity. "If I by chance had said some things to you, and you caught them up again, as you like. But you have no right, for I never speak to anyone. I scorn to talk. If one has a conviction, then it's clear to me. But you're doing foolishly. I don't argue about things when everything's settled. I can't bear arguing. I never want to argue." "And perhaps you are very wise," Stepan Trofimovitch could not resist saying. "I apologise to you, but I am not angry with anyone here," the visitor went on, speaking hotly and rapidly. "I have seen few people for 4 years. For 4 years I have talked little and have tried to see no one, for my own objects which do not concern anyone else, for 4 years. Liputin found this out and is laughing. I understand and don't mind. I'm not ready to take offence, only annoyed at his liberty. And if I don't explain my ideas to you," he concluded unexpectedly, scanning us all with resolute eyes, "it's not at all that I'm afraid of your giving information to the government, that's not so. Please do not imagine nonsense of that sort." No one made any reply to these words. We only looked at each other. Even Liputin forgot to snigger. "Gentlemen, I'm very sorry." Stepan Trofimovitch got up resolutely from the sofa. "But I feel ill and upset. Excuse me." "Ach, that's for us to go," Mr. Kirillov started, snatching up his cap. "It's a good thing you told us. I'm so forgetful." He rose, and with a good natured air went up to Stepan Trofimovitch, holding out his hand. "I'm sorry you're not well, and I came." "I wish you every success among us," answered Stepan Trofimovitch, shaking hands with him heartily and without haste. "I understand that if, as you say, you have lived so long abroad, cutting yourself off from people for objects of your own and forgetting Russia, you must inevitably look with wonder on us who are Russians to the backbone. And we must feel the same thing about you. Mais cela passera. I'm only puzzled at one thing. You want to build our bridge, and at the same time you declare that you hold with the principle of universal destruction. They won't let you build our bridge." "What? What's that you said? Ach, I say!" Kirillov cried, much struck, and he suddenly broke into the most frank and good humoured laughter. For a moment his face took a quite childlike expression, which I thought suited him particularly. Liputin rubbed his hand with delight at Stepan Trofimovitch's witty remark. I kept wondering to myself why Stepan Trofimovitch was so frightened of Liputin, and why he had cried out, "I am lost," when he heard him coming. End of Chapter 3, Section 4. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine.
Part 1, Chapter 3, Sections 5 and 6 of The Possessed by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 3, Section 5. We were all standing in the doorway. It was the moment when hosts and guests hurriedly exchange the last and most cordial words, and then part to their mutual gratification. "The reason he's so cross to day," Liputin dropped all at once, as it were casually, when he was just going out of the room, "is because he had a disturbance to day with Captain Lebyadkin over his sister. Captain Lebyadkin thrashes that precious sister of his, the mad girl, every day with a whip, a real Cossack whip, every morning and evening. So Alexey Nilitch has positively taken the lodge so as not to be present. Well, good bye." "A sister? An invalid? With a whip?" Stepan Trofimovitch cried out as though he had suddenly been lashed with a whip himself. "What sister? What Lebyadkin?" All his former terror came back in an instant. "Lebyadkin? Oh, that's the retired captain. He used only to call himself a lieutenant before." "Oh, what is his rank to me? What sister? Good heavens! You say Lebyadkin? But there used to be a Lebyadkin here." "That's the very man, our Lebyadkin, at Virginsky's, you remember?" "But he was caught with forged papers?" "Well, now he's come back. He's been here almost 3 weeks, and under the most peculiar circumstances." "Why, but he's a scoundrel." "As though no one could be a scoundrel among us!" Liputin grinned suddenly, his knavish little eyes seeming to peer into Stepan Trofimovitch's soul. "Good heavens! I didn't mean that at all, though I quite agree with you about that, with you particularly. But what then, what then? What did you mean by that? You certainly meant something by that." "Why, it's all so trivial. This captain to all appearances went away from us at that time, not because of the forged papers, but simply to look for his sister, who was in hiding from him somewhere, it seems. Well, and now he's brought her, and that's the whole story. Why do you seem frightened, Stepan Trofimovitch? I only tell this from his drunken chatter, though; he doesn't speak of it himself when he's sober. He's an irritable man, and, so to speak, æsthetic in a military style. Only he has bad taste. And this sister is lame as well as mad. She seems to have been seduced by someone, and Mr. Lebyadkin has, it seems, for many years received a yearly grant from the seducer by way of compensation for the wound to his honour. So it would seem at least from his chatter, though I believe it's only drunken talk. It's simply his brag. Besides, that sort of thing is done much cheaper. But that he has a sum of money is perfectly certain. 10 days ago he was walking barefoot, and now I've seen hundreds in his hands. His sister has fits of some sort every day. She shrieks, and he keeps her in order with the whip. 'You must inspire a woman with respect,' he says. What I can't understand is how Shatov goes on living above him. Alexey Nilitch has only been 3 days with them. They were acquainted in Petersburg, and now he's taken the lodge to get away from the disturbance." "Is this all true?" said Stepan Trofimovitch, addressing the engineer. "You do gossip a lot, Liputin," the latter muttered wrathfully. "Mysteries, secrets! Where have all these mysteries and secrets among us sprung from?" Stepan Trofimovitch could not refrain from exclaiming. The engineer frowned, flushed red, shrugged his shoulders, and went out of the room. "Alexey Nilitch positively snatched the whip out of his hand, broke it, and threw it out of the window, and they had a violent quarrel," added Liputin. "Why are you chattering, Liputin? It's stupid. What for?" Alexey Nilitch turned again instantly. "Why be so modest and conceal the generous impulses of one's soul, that is, of your soul, I'm not speaking of my own." "How stupid it is, and quite unnecessary. Lebyadkin's stupid and quite worthless and no use to the cause and utterly mischievous. Why do you keep babbling all sorts of things? I'm going." "Oh, what a pity!" cried Liputin with a candid smile, "or I'd have amused you with another little story, Stepan Trofimovitch. I came, indeed, on purpose to tell you, though I dare say you've heard it already. Well, till another time. Alexey Nilitch is in such a hurry. Good bye for the present. The story concerns Varvara Petrovna. She amused me the day before yesterday. She sent for me on purpose. It's simply killing. Good bye." But at this point Stepan Trofimovitch absolutely would not let him go. He seized him by the shoulders, turned him sharply back into the room, and sat him down in a chair. Liputin was positively scared. "Why, to be sure," he began, looking warily at Stepan Trofimovitch from his chair. "She suddenly sent for me and asked me confidentially my private opinion, whether Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch is mad or in his right mind. Isn't that astonishing?" "You're out of your mind," muttered Stepan Trofimovitch, and suddenly, as though he were beside himself, "Liputin, you know perfectly well that you only came here to tell me something insulting of that sort, and... something worse." In a flash I recalled his conjecture that Liputin knew not only more than we did about our affair, but something else which we should never know. "Upon my word, Stepan Trofimovitch," muttered Liputin, seeming greatly alarmed, "upon my word..." "Hold your tongue and begin. I beg you, Mr. Kirillov, to come back too and be present. I earnestly beg you. Sit down, and you, Liputin, begin directly, simply, and without any excuses." "If I had only known it would upset you so much I wouldn't have begun at all. And of course I thought you knew all about it from Varvara Petrovna herself." "You didn't think that at all. Begin, begin, I tell you." "Only do me the favour to sit down yourself, or how can I sit here when you are running about before me in such excitement? I can't speak coherently." Stepan Trofimovitch restrained himself and sank impressively into an easy chair. The engineer stared gloomily at the floor. Liputin looked at them with intense enjoyment. "How am I to begin? I'm too overwhelmed." Section 6 The day before yesterday a servant was suddenly sent to me. "You are asked to call at 12 o'clock," said he. Can you fancy such a thing? I threw aside my work and precisely at midday yesterday I was ringing at the bell. I was let into the drawing room. I waited a minute. She came in. She made me sit down and sat down herself, opposite. I sat down and I couldn't believe it. You know how she has always treated me. She began at once without beating about the bush. You know her way. "You remember," she said, "that 4 years ago, when Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch was ill, he did some strange things which made all the town wonder, till the position was explained. One of those actions concerned you personally. When Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch recovered, he went at my request to call on you. I know that he talked to you several times before, too. Tell me openly and candidly what you..." she faltered a little at this point, "what you thought of Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch then. What was your view of him altogether? What idea you were able to form of him at that time and still have?" Here she was completely confused, so that she paused for a whole minute and suddenly flushed. I was alarmed. She began again. Touchingly is not quite the word, it's not applicable to her, but in a very impressive tone. "I want you," she said, "to understand me clearly and without mistake. I've sent for you now because I look upon you as a keen‐sighted and quick‐witted man, qualified to make accurate observations." What compliments! "You'll understand too," she said, "that I am a mother appealing to you. Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch has suffered some calamities and has passed through many changes of fortune in his life. All that," she said, "might well have affected the state of his mind. I'm not speaking of madness, of course," she said. "That's quite out of the question." This was uttered proudly and resolutely. "But there might be something strange, something peculiar, some turn of thought, a tendency to some particular way of looking at things." Those were her exact words, and I admired, Stepan Trofimovitch, the exactness with which Varvara Petrovna can put things. She's a lady of superior intellect. "I have noticed in him anyway," she said, "a perpetual restlessness and a tendency to peculiar impulses. But I am a mother and you are an impartial spectator, and therefore qualified with your intelligence to form a more impartial opinion. I implore you in fact" yes, that word "implore" was uttered "to tell me the whole truth, without mincing matters. And if you will give me your word never to forget that I have spoken to you in confidence,
you may reckon upon my always being ready to seize every opportunity in the future to show my gratitude." "Well, what do you say to that?" "You have so amazed me," faltered Stepan Trofimovitch, "that I don't believe you." "Yes, observe, observe," cried Liputin, as though he had not heard Stepan Trofimovitch. "Observe what must be her agitation and uneasiness if she stoops from her grandeur to appeal to a man like me, and even condescends to beg me to keep it secret. What do you call that? Hasn't she received some news of Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch, something unexpected?" "I don't know of news of any sort. I haven't seen her for some days, but I must say," lisped Stepan Trofimovitch, evidently hardly able to think clearly, "but I must say, Liputin, that if it was said to you in confidence, and here you're telling it before every one absolutely in confidence, but God strike me dead if I... But as for telling it here, what does it matter? Are we strangers, even Alexey Nilitch?" "I don't share that attitude. No doubt we three here will keep the secret, but I'm afraid of the fourth, you, and wouldn't trust you in anything." "What do you mean by that? Why, it's more to my interest than anyone's, seeing I was promised eternal gratitude. What I wanted was to point out in this connection one extremely strange incident, rather to say psychological than simply strange. Yesterday evening, under the influence of my conversation with Varvara Petrovna you can fancy yourself what an impression it made on me I approached Alexey Nilitch with a discreet question. 'You knew Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch abroad,' said I, 'and used to know him before in Petersburg too. What do you think of his mind and his abilities?' said I. He answered laconically, as his way is, that he was a man of subtle intellect and sound judgment. 'And have you never noticed in the course of years,' said I, 'any turn of ideas or peculiar way of looking at things, or any, so to say, insanity?' In fact, I repeated Varvara Petrovna's own question, and would you believe it, Alexey Nilitch suddenly grew thoughtful and scowled, just as he's doing now. 'Yes,' said he, 'I have sometimes thought there was something strange.' Take note, too, that if anything could have seemed strange even to Alexey Nilitch, it must really have been something, mustn't it?" "Is that true?" said Stepan Trofimovitch, turning to Alexey Nilitch. "I should prefer not to speak of it," answered Alexey Nilitch, suddenly raising his head and looking at him with flashing eyes. "I wish to contest your right to do this, Liputin. You've no right to drag me into this. I did not give my whole opinion at all. Though I knew Nikolay Stavrogin in Petersburg, that was long ago, and though I've met him since, I know him very little. I beg you to leave me out and... all this is something like scandal." Liputin threw up his hands with an air of oppressed innocence. "A scandalmonger! Why not say a spy while you're about it? It's all very well for you, Alexey Nilitch, to criticise when you stand aloof from everything. But you wouldn't believe it, Stepan Trofimovitch. Take Captain Lebyadkin, he is stupid enough, one may say. In fact, one's ashamed to say how stupid he is. There is a Russian comparison to signify the degree of it. And do you know, he considers himself injured by Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch, though he is full of admiration for his wit. 'I'm amazed,' said he, 'at that man. He's a subtle serpent,' his own words. And I said to him, still under the influence of my conversation, and after I had spoken to Alexey Nilitch, 'What do you think, captain, is your subtle serpent mad or not?' Would you believe it, it was just as if I'd given him a sudden lash from behind. He suddenly leapt up from his seat. 'Yes,' said he, 'yes, only that,' he said, 'cannot affect.' 'Affect what?' He didn't finish. 'Yes, and then he fell to thinking so bitterly, thinking so much, that his drunkenness dropped off him. We were sitting in Filipov's restaurant, and it wasn't till half an hour later that he suddenly struck the table with his fist. 'Yes,' said he, 'maybe he's mad, but that can't affect it.' Again he didn't say what it couldn't affect. Of course, I'm only giving you an extract of the conversation, but one can understand the sense of it. You may ask whom you like, they all have the same idea in their heads, though it never entered anyone's head before. 'Yes,' they say, 'he's mad. He's very clever, but perhaps he's mad too.'" Stepan Trofimovitch sat pondering and thought intently. "And how does Lebyadkin know?" "Do you mind inquiring that of Alexey Nilitch, who has just called me a spy?" I'm a spy, yet I don't know, but Alexey Nilitch knows all the ins and outs of it, and holds his tongue." "I know nothing about it, or hardly anything," answered the engineer, with the same irritation. "You make Lebyadkin drunk to find out. You brought me here to find out and to make me say. And so you must be a spy." "I haven't made him drunk yet, and he's not worth the money either, with all his secrets. They are not worth that to me. I don't know what they are to you; on the contrary, he is scattering the money, though 12 days ago he begged 15 kopecks of me, and it's he treats me to champagne, not I him. But you've given me an idea, and if there should be occasion I will make him drunk, just to get to the bottom of it, and maybe I shall find out all your little secrets." Liputin snapped back spitefully. Stepan Trofimovitch looked in bewilderment at the two disputants. Both were giving themselves away, and, what's more, were not standing on ceremony. The thought crossed my mind that Liputin had brought this Alexey Nilitch to us with the simple object of drawing him into a conversation through a third person for purposes of his own, his favourite manoeuvre. "Alexey Nilitch knows Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch quite well," he went on irritably, "only he conceals it. And as to your question about Captain Lebyadkin, he made his acquaintance before any of us did, 6 years ago in Petersburg, in that obscure, if one may so express it, epoch in the life of Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch, before he had dreamed of rejoicing our hearts by coming here. Our prince, one must conclude, surrounded himself with rather a queer selection of acquaintances. It was at that time, it seems, that he made acquaintance with this gentleman here." "Take care, Liputin. I warn you Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch meant to be here soon himself, and he knows how to defend himself." "Why warn me? I am the first to cry out that he is a man of the most subtle and refined intelligence, and I quite reassured Varvara Petrovna yesterday on that score. 'It's his character,' I said to her, 'that I can't answer for.' Lebyadkin said the same thing yesterday. 'A lot of harm has come to me from his character,' he said. 'Stepan Trofimovitch, it's all very well for you to cry out about slander and spying, and at the very time observe that you wring it all out of me, and with such immense curiosity too. Now Varvara Petrovna went straight to the point yesterday. "You have had a personal interest in the business," she said. "That's why I appeal to you." "I should say so. What need to look for motives when I've swallowed a personal insult from his Excellency before the whole society of the place? I should think I have grounds to be interested, not merely for the sake of gossip. He shakes hands with you one day, and next day, for no earthly reason, he returns your hospitality by slapping you on the cheeks in the face of all decent society if the fancy takes him, out of sheer wantonness. And what's more, the fair sex is everything for them, these butterflies and meddlesome cocks. Grand gentlemen with little wings, like the ancient Cupids, lady-killing Petchorins. It's all very well for you, Stepan Trofimovitch, a confirmed bachelor, to talk like that, stick up for his Excellency and call me a slanderer. But if you married a pretty young wife, as you're still such a fine fellow, then I dare say you'd bolt your door against our prince, and throw up barricades in your house. Why, if only that Mademoiselle Lebyadkin, who is thrashed with a whip, were not mad and bandy-legged, by Jove, I should fancy she was the victim of the passions of our general, and that it was from him that Captain Lebyadkin had suffered in his family dignity, as he expresses it himself. Only perhaps that is inconsistent with his refined taste, though indeed even that's no hindrance to him. Every berry is worth picking if only he's in the mood for it. You talk of slander, but I'm not crying this aloud though the whole town is ringing with it. I only listen and assent. That's not prohibited." "The town's ringing with it? What's the town ringing with?" "That is, Captain Lebyadkin is shouting for all the town to hear." "And isn't that just the same as the market‐place ringing with it? How am I to blame? I interest myself in it only among friends, for, after all, I consider myself among friends here." He looked at us with an innocent air. "Something's happened. Only consider, they say his Excellency has sent 300 roubles from Switzerland by a most honourable young lady, and so to say modest orphan, whom I have the honour of knowing, to be handed over to Captain Lebyadkin. And Lebyadkin, a little later, was told as an absolute fact also by a very honourable and therefore trustworthy person, I won't say whom, that not 300 but 1,000 roubles had been sent. And so Lebyadkin keeps crying out, "The young lady has grabbed 700 roubles belonging to me," and he's almost ready to call in the police. He threatens to, anyway, and he's making an uproar all over the town. "This is vile, vile of you!" cried the engineer, leaping up suddenly from his chair. "But I say, you are yourself the honourable person who brought word to Lebyadkin from Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch that 1,000 roubles were sent, not 300. Why, the captain told me so himself when he was drunk. It's... it's an unhappy misunderstanding. Someone's made a mistake and it's led to... It's nonsense, and it's base of you." But I'm ready to believe that it's nonsense, and I'm distressed at the story. For take it as you will, a girl of an honourable reputation is implicated first over the 700 roubles, and secondly in unmistakable intimacy with Nikolay Vsyevolodovitch. For how much does it mean to his Excellency to disgrace a girl of good character, or put to shame another man's wife, like that incident with me? If he comes across a generous‐hearted man, he'll force him to cover the sins of others under the shelter of his honourable name. That's just what I had to put up with. I'm speaking of myself. "Be careful, Liputin." Stepan Trofimovitch got up from his easy chair and turned pale. "Don't believe it, don't believe it! Somebody has made a mistake, and Lebyadkin's drunk," exclaimed the engineer, in indescribable excitement. "It will all be explained, but I can't... and I think it's low... and... that's enough, enough!" He ran out of the room. "What are you about? Why, I'm going with you!" cried Liputin, startled. He jumped up and ran after Alexey Nilitch. Chapter 4 in Bangor, Maine.